Another day, another video. It's a little warm in my car today. It's getting up to 85 degrees today in Austin, Texas. So I guess I'm going to have to wrap up this whole series before it gets to be spring or summer, or I'm going to have to find another place to record my videos. That would be a shame because I like this spot. Okay, so I guess I could run the car, but then there'd be noise in the video, and that would be a bummer. Okay, so anywho, let's get to the subject. In the previous videos, I argued that the universe had a finite past, and that because the universe had a finite past, it therefore came into existence. So today I want to argue that the universe had a cause. And before I do that, let me first make the point that I guess I should have made in the last video, which is that if the universe came into existence, then that means it had to have come into existence out of nothing, because there was no pre-existing material. We're talking about the very beginning of time itself. And so obviously there couldn't have been any material hanging around before that. So if the universe and time and everything all came into existence, then it had to have come into existence out of nothing. Now, when I say out of nothing, I'm not saying that nothing was this thing that caused the universe to come into existence, or nothing was the stuff from which the universe was made. That's not what I mean by nothing. What I mean by nothing is not anything. So, in other words, there was nothing from which the universe was made. Does that make sense? Okay, so I bring that up because it seems like every time a conversation comes up in which the word nothing comes into the conversation, there's always one person that accuses the other person of treating nothing as if it were something. I think in most cases people are not doing that, and I wish we'd just be a little bit more charitable towards each other when that subject comes up. If it sounds like somebody is using nothing in that way, you're probably just misunderstanding them, and you should just ask for some clarity. Unless you're talking to Lawrence Krauss, in which case nothing is something. But he may be the only one that treats nothing that way. Okay, so anywho, so there are three things I want to say about whether the universe has a cause or not. The first thing is just that, I mean, if you've got a choice, if we acknowledge that the universe came into existence, and if you've got a choice, either it has a cause or it doesn't have a cause, and you have nothing else to go on, no argument or no evidence or anything like that to adjudicate between these two views, it seems like the default view ought to be to assume that it has a cause. Just because, I don't know, just because. That's all I'm going to say about that point. The second is that there's an inductive argument you can make that would apply to, you can make a broad claim that everything that begins to exist has a cause, which is what William Lane Craig does. I'm trying to avoid doing that in this argument. The reason I've been arguing the way I have and not using William Lane Craig's syllogism is to avoid certain objections that come up because he relies on this broad principle: everything that begins to exist has a cause. But let me say something about that anyway. So it seems like the inductive argument goes that it seems like everything in our experience that begins has a cause, and so you can just extrapolate to say, well, if everything we've experienced has a cause, and we've never experienced anything coming into existence without a cause, then it must be the case that everything that comes into existence has a cause. And this would apply whether it came into existence out of pre-existing material or out of nothing. And the objection there, the obvious objection, is that if you're talking about things coming into existence out of nothing, then you're talking about a completely different reference class than the reference class you use to prove this general principle. If everything in your experience came into existence out of pre-existing material, then you cannot extrapolate. You cannot extrapolate to a broader causal principle that includes a reference class where things come into existence without a cause. Does that make sense? Give me some feedback. I can't hear you. I'm just talking to myself here. The argument is that since you have this difference in reference class, that you cannot make this extrapolation to the universe. The only way you could extrapolate to the universe or include the universe under that causal principle as if we had examples in our experience of things coming into existence without a material cause or out of nothing. And I think there's some strength in that objection. I think that's a good objection. But I think all it does, though, is remove certainty. Because whenever you're reasoning inductively, you can always point to some difference between the things that you observe and the things that you don't observe. Like, if I lived in Texas my whole life and every crow I ever saw was black, and I reasoned, well, it must be the case that all crows are black. Somebody could come along and say, well, you've only seen crows in Texas. You've never seen crows in Georgia. How do you know crows in Georgia are black? Well, that can be true no matter how many crows I observe. There's always going to be some place that I haven't observed them, or some situation that I haven't observed. Like, what if all the crows I've observed have been during the day? Somebody could say, well, you haven't observed any crows at night, so you don't know all crows are black. Well, it's the very nature of inductive reasoning that you're reasoning from the observed to the unobserved. And so it seems to me you can make an argument from the observing instances of things beginning to exist out of pre-existing material to things beginning to exist without. It's just that it's not a very strong inductive case. So that's my position on that. I think a much stronger argument, and the one that I rely on the most, is the argument from intuition. And this one does not apply to things coming into existence out of pre-existing material. It only applies to things beginning to exist out of nothing. And that's this intuitive obviousness that it's impossible for anything to just spontaneously pop into existence uncaused out of nothing. And actually, even when it comes to things that come into existence out of pre-existing material, we don't actually observe the causation directly. What we observe is we observe something happening, and we observe something happening before that, and we just assume causation. We don't actually witness the causation. David Hume talked about this in his book, An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, that we don't observe causation directly. What we observe is like conjuguity, togetherness in space and time. We see two things conjoined in space and time, and we assume one thing causes the other. But in reality, I think this intuition is actually what feeds into our belief that everything that comes into existence, even in cases of things coming into existence out of pre-existing material, we have this intuition that they have causes. That's why we go look. We usually observe phenomena, we observe things happening, and we assume that there's a cause, and then we go looking for the cause. So it's always the case that that intuition is doing all the work for us. We have this intuition that things don't just come into existence all by themselves, that they've got causes. So we go looking for the causes. Well, I think this is especially true in the case of something coming into existence out of nothing. Now, that's not something you can prove. I think most people have this intuition, and I'm sometimes surprised when I run into people who say that they do not have this intuition. And I have run into a few people like that. And I really don't know what to say to those people. Because, I've run into people who don't even believe in the law of non-contradiction. That's something I know with absolute certainty. And I know that with almost the same probably the same certainty, that it's impossible for something to just spontaneously come into existence out of nothing. I say almost the same certainty because I don't think that there's a logical contradiction in the notion of something coming into existence out of nothing. But it still seems, metaphysically impossible. There are illustrations you can use to try to get people's intuitions to rise to the surface. Jonathan Edwards came up with one of them that William Lane Craig uses sometimes. He says something like, well, if it's possible for something to pop into existence uncaused out of nothing, then there's no reason that it should just be universes or just be atoms or whatever. It could be anything, because nothingness doesn't have properties because it's not a thing. And so there can't be any constraints on what can come into existence. So I mean, a tiger is every bit as probable as the universe. I mean, anything is equally probable because you cannot attach a probability to something spontaneously coming into existence out of nothing. So that's one thought experiment. The other is that may have to edit a little bit out of this video. So if we're talking about something coming into existence out of nothing, then there cannot even be a probability attached to something coming into existence out of nothing. If there's no probability, then it's impossible to happen. If there was the only way you could have a probability is if you had a state of affairs in which, there were certain properties that determine that. And but if we're talking about something coming into existence out of nothing, there can't be any properties that create a probability. So there can't be a probability that things will come into existence. So it's just impossible. Now, when it comes to like quantum physics, there are certain events that possibly most physicists take to be indeterministic events, like pair production and annihilation, radioactive decay, things like that. So you do have things spontaneously coming into existence in those cases. I'm not totally convinced that reality is indeterministic in that way, but I do allow for the possibility. But even in those possibilities, it's not the case that things come into existence without causes. Like, if you have beta minus decay, a beta particle is basically an electron. So you have an electron come into existence. But it doesn't, and although it's unpredictable exactly when it's going to happen or something like that, it's not completely acausal. The cause of radioactive decay usually has to do with the ratio of protons and neutrons. There are initial conditions that create a probability that a radioactive decay event will happen. And so what you have there is causes, but they're not sufficient causes, because if they were sufficient causes, then given the cause, the event would be necessitated and it would happen as soon as the causes were all present. So if the decay event is delayed, that means that the cause was not sufficient, but it doesn't mean there wasn't a cause. Obviously there is a cause, and that cause consists in all the initial conditions. And if you look at a table, you can Google table of nuclides, and it will give you, a table of all the different isotopes of each element and what they will decay into and what the half-life is. Each one of these radioactive isotopes has a specific half-life, and that's where if you get enough of them together, then given a certain amount of time, half of them will undergo a decay reaction. And so if there were no causes at all, then there couldn't be specific half-lives for each radioactive event. It would all just be arbitrary and all over the map. You couldn't create a table of nuclides. Well, you could create a table of nuclides, but you wouldn't be able to specify the kind of radioactive decay event that's going to happen, and you could not specify a half-life for each isotope. So even in the case of what a lot of physicists consider indeterministic or spontaneous events, they're not acausal. They still have causes. And so we have nothing in our experience or anything that would indicate it's possible for something to just spontaneously happen or come into existence without any cause whatsoever. Let's see, what else do I want to say about this? I know later on while I'm editing this video, I'm going to think, I should have said such and such, and then I'll add something to this video, but I'm trying not to do that right now. I'm trying to actually think of what else I wanted to say. Oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to say. I was going to talk about the history of this whole notion that it's impossible for something to come out of nothing uncaused. There's been a whole history of philosophy in which a lot of people have considered this to be an intuitively obvious basic fundamental thing of reason. Lucretius is one of the earliest that I've read anyway. He's got this book called On the Nature of Things. And the whole book is really interesting to read. It's all written in poetry. And if you get the Penguin Books version of it, it's a really good translation. But anyway, he's got like several pages arguing that it's impossible for something to come into existence out of nothing. And for him, the intuition was so strong that he didn't even think that it was possible for something to be caused to come into existence out of nothing. He thought that the notion was so utterly impossible that not even a all-powerful God could cause it to happen. So for him, the intuition was really strong. And there have been other people throughout history who have assumed this. Some people think that David Hume denied this because he denied knowledge of causation. In reality, he didn't. What he argued was that although causation is not something we learn from experience, it's something we bring to our experience. At the same time, he didn't believe it was something that we knew by way of a rational intuition. He thought that it came from some other source, and I really don't know how he justified belief in causation, but he didn't deny causation. And I guess that's about all I have to say. This is one of those things, you know, I argued in my earlier series on epistemology that there are certain items of a priori knowledge we have that sit at the foundation of everything we have, everything else we know, and we know those things by a rational intuition. Well, it seems to me that this is one of those things, that it's impossible for something to spontaneously come into existence out of nothing. And this intuition for me is so strong that I am certain of it. I mean, I have no doubt whatsoever. But like I said, it's not something that can be proved. And so when I run into somebody who lacks this intuition, I don't know what to do other than try to use thought experiments to try to get their intuition to rise to the surface. I think I did say in that series that just because something can be known intuitively doesn't mean everybody's going to know it. Like, I mean, I know with absolute certainty that the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees if we're talking about flat Euclidean space-time. But that's not obvious to everybody. Some things are just easier to see for some people than it is for other people. I mean, I doubt, if you had asked me when I was an infant, I couldn't have told you that it's impossible for something to come into existence uncaused out of nothing. That's an intuition that kind of developed at some later stage of development or whatever. But so I guess when it comes to people who just don't have this intuition, that's no reason to doubt the intuition yourself, because I mean the fact that a dog can't figure out that the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees is no reason for you to doubt it, because if you can see it clearly, then you have all the justification in the world for believing it. And so for me, any suggestion that the universe spontaneously came into existence uncaused out of nothing, I'm just going to dismiss out of hand, because I know for certain that that's impossible. There's no way that could ever happen. If there was ever a situation where nothing at all exists, including God, nothing would exist now, because there would be no reason for anything to ever come into existence. There'd be just no possibility for that to happen. So, anywho, what follows from all that is that the universe had a cause. So, in the next video, I will talk about what we can infer about that cause. And then that'll probably be the end of the Kalam cosmological argument. And we'll go on to other arguments after that. There you have it. So I realize this video is a little bit repetitive in some parts, but let me just remind everybody that's watching this video why I'm doing these videos. It's because I'm trying to learn how to speak clearly and effortlessly and fluently without having a lot of pauses and a lot of difficulty in getting my words out and translating my thoughts into words without stuttering, without using the wrong words or having bad speech patterns. I'm basically trying to be a better speaker. And so part of how I'm trying to do this is by speaking off the top of my head without the use of notes or outlines or anything like that. So I realize these videos are kind of rough to listen to. So if you don't want to listen to them, I mean, just don't listen to them. But I'm doing this kind of as an exercise for myself to become a better speaker and everything. So that's why it's this rough. There you have it.